Today's presentation, Flight Simulators 101, leveraging a home simulator for flight training. Our presenter today is Chris McGonegle, who happens to be a employee of Sporty's. He's the director of search marketing, and he's also their flight simulator specialist. Chris was a graduate of the Sporty's Academy, where he soloed in February of 2011. He's now a commercial pilot with an instrument rating. And Chris notes that his first flight simulator program was Microsoft Flight Simulator 4.0. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn control of the presentation over to Chris and let him take this away.
Well, thank you for that introduction, David. That was very helpful. I appreciate it. Let's see. Can you see my screen now?
Yep, we got it crystal clear.
All right, thank you. So again, David, thank you for that introduction. Thank you to EAA for Learn to Fly Week. Sporty is very proud and happy to be a part of it. And I'm really appreciative of the opportunity to present on something that's close to my heart, which is flight simulators. I kind of live in the bounds of both worlds where I really appreciate digital flying, as I like to call it, but then also physical. And having gone through Sporty's Academy, I really recognize the benefits of using it as a tool, if you will, throughout training, but also post-training. So we're going to get into some of those abilities today, and we'll go ahead and get started. So first off, a little bit of housekeeping. Let's cover the outline of today's webinar. We're going to talk about early flight simulators. We're going to define what is a flight simulator. We'll talk about software programs that are out there. We're going to, of course, talk about hardware. We'll cover a couple accessories. I like to think of these as the items that are maybe less thought of when building a flight simulator. So we'll cover those. We're also going to talk about logging time, the quintessential question I always get. Can I use a simulator to add ink to my logbook? And we will cover that one. And then we're going to talk about a simulator value for pilots, and we'll wrap up with some additional resources. So let's jump into early flight simulators and take a quick look at how far we have come. So in 1982, the second version of Microsoft Flight Simulator 2.0 was a cutting edge program that provided, as you can see, our typical six-pack of instruments, some comms, a little bit of nav gear, as well as a couple engine indicators. This program, and I apologize, 1984, not 1982. You can see that graphics were very, very limited. There was only a few color options here. The performance wasn't very much, but it was a adequate way to show what happens when you go full open throttle and you pull back on the yoke. You can watch the instruments start to give off correct indications. You start to see RPMs change, knots. So it was a very elementary way to get us into how to use a simulator or what happens when you do those things. Fast forward to today, we can recreate any color, shadow, texture of the instrument panel, and each instrument provides accurate indications for the flight conditions we are in. There has never been a better time to get into flight sim. I am confident in that statement. And the second part of that is it's getting better every day. There's new products debuting, there's new software programs, computer performance is growing exponentially. So it's really a great time to use one of these platforms in line with training. I always like to end this portion of the presentation with a little before and after, if you will. Here is a representation of Meigs Field, which, you know, kind of sad. We can't fly into there physically these days, but we can do it digitally. So this is in Chicago. You can see the texture or the design of those clouds are no longer just the marshmallows in the sky. We can actually see on the right side of the image, there are now shadows from those clouds. You'll see there are ships, there are trees, there's even a slope indicator, visual slope indicator to the left of the runway. And we can even see a little bit of wave cresting or texture on the water beneath us. So that is Microsoft Flight Sim 2020. And then superimposed there is one of those aircrafts from the 1984 version, Microsoft Flight Sim 2.0. And I really like looking at this picture because it shows us what we have today at our disposal with the field, the weather, the environment, and then also takes us back to kind of where it started with that two different colored, what looks like an 8-bit type aircraft coming into land. So moving on. Let's define what makes an at-home flight simulator. First piece is a computer. You're going to need a personal computer, a desktop, even a laptop is eligible these days to run these programs and also interact with the hardware. Now, talking about flight sim PCs could be a presentation in itself. There are so many things to cover with video cards, with graphics, with storage. We have a lot of blogs and information online. I'm going to focus on how to use a PC if you've already got it, rather than the idea of finding or prospecting one. So if you want more information, you can reach out to myself or David. We'll steer you in the right direction. That being said, you need a PC. Think of that as the first part. The second thing you're going to need is the software. So you're going to need a program to be put onto the PC, and this is what's going to be represented on your screen. It's also what's going to understand the commands you give it and also allow some customization in what you're looking for. And then last but certainly not least, we need that hardware. We need something to give those inputs to the program and sometimes in return give us outputs. The Yolk on that screen, you push forward, you're going to watch the aircraft on your monitor pitch down. So these are the ways we're able to give those inputs to the software program. You are able to quote unquote fly an aircraft with a keyboard and a mouse these days, but considering what's on the market, I wouldn't recommend it. Quick analogy for me is think of software, which is what we're about to cover, as the brain of the system. It's receiving all the inputs, it's making a decision, and then sending out information. So that's the way I like to think about software. First one we are going to cover is the more popular of the three we're going to talk about today, which is Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. This program came out at the end of August of 2020, and it has created thousands of hours on YouTube of simmers flying their aircraft, exploring the world. It's a great program for accuracy when it comes to what's outside. You'll see that they are highlighting some animals if you're flying in the Sahara. It also has details focused on mountain ranges. You can also jump in a helicopter or a fighter aircraft and go fly along some coasts. It's really a great representation of what's going to be outside the aircraft as well as in. And because of that, a lot of people have really bought in. So let's cover a couple things I like about the program that speaks to pilots. And the first one is going to be flight training, or I'm sorry, flight planning. So in flight planning, we are able to choose a route we'd like to take from airport A to airport B. We can plug in if we want to go GPS direct. You'll see here I have selected IFR low altitude airways as my route. It's pre-connected those. You can also select via VORs. There's a lot of abilities here to challenge your route and also give us a couple metrics. For instance, how long will this flight be in a Cessna 172 Skyhawk? The other thing I like about it is we can also get a profile view. So this looks very similar to what I experienced when I was doing my VFR flight planning. I'd want to calculate how long to get to cruise, how long at my filed altitude, and then how long or when should I start my descent. And those are all things we can plan out in this profile view. So one feature I really like about the program that's worth mentioning, and it's unique because this is the only program that carries that. Another thing about Microsoft, and I kind of jumped the gun on, is it gives you some training. So these are all native to the program. When you install the program, you're going to have this at your disposal. And the different categories are basic handling, takeoffs and landings. You also have some VFR navigation, a little bit of airliner training, and I have not really jumped into that yet. You'll see there's some bush pilot flying and then IFR navigation. And within each one of these categories, there's a few lessons that they'll give you. So you're able to jump into speed control, VOR basics, ILS approach, your IFR test, if you'd like. When I click on one of these chapters or lessons, if you will, gives me a detailed briefing on where I should be focusing, where I'm going to start, a little bit of a briefing on things I should pay attention to, and then when I'm ready, you just jump in the aircraft and fly. I like it because this is a really great way for someone who maybe gets this program and they don't know much about aviation. They can immediately jump in and get immersed in the way to go about flying a VOR if you get to that point, but more so maybe the basics of taking off or
Hey,
coming into
Chris,
land.
this is David just checking in. Wanted to let you know some of the slides, there's a little bit of a delay coming through on when we see it, or it gets real pixelated before it pops up. So I just wanted to give you a heads up.
Understood. Appreciate it. And I will hit the next button a few seconds before I actually start talking about it. So thank you for that heads up, David.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the flight training portion is very unique, I would say, to Microsoft. It's very helpful and is a great user interface of how you can work with that program. And then the final thing to cover for Microsoft that I like is weather. So here you'll see that we are outside the 172 that is flying along, and I've brought up our weather command, if you will, to where I can change what time of the day it is just with the scrolling of this bar right here. We also have the ability to change presets of a few clouds. We can change the cloud heights, move them up or move them down. What I really like about this is we didn't have to pause the program and go back to a main menu. We are live flying the aircraft while making these edits. So as our 172 is heading west on its current heading, I can move these clouds and watch them move on my screen also. So really nice way to quickly and expedited way of making weather edits as you're flying along is really beneficial when you get to the instrument flying phase, but something worth highlighting that I really admire in Microsoft Flight Sim 2020. The next program is XPlane 12. This 12th iteration of XPlane came out around the end of 2022, and it is a really great program for getting granular on settings of said program. So you're able to get in and really make those small detail changes to weather, to the aircraft settings, to weight and balance, to failures, which I'll get into in just a second. But a lot of people who are more seasoned as a simulator user tend to go for XPlane 12. So a couple things that I like about XPlane 12, first off, is quick approaches. And what I mean by that is here is our airport selection screen. As you can see, we find the airport we'd like. I've chosen Claremont County. We can choose which runway we'd like, and we can either start on the runway, a 3 nautical mile approach, or a 10 nautical mile approach. So if we want to throw in some challenging winds and work on our approaches, and it's, let's say, a 10 knot wind out of 3 o'clock as we're coming into approach, we can quickly run those rather than taking off, flying the pattern, doing an extended downwind, coming into base to final and recreating it. With a couple clicks, we can be right where we need to be and quickly go through those scenarios. So that's one thing that's unique to XPlane that I like to highlight. The next thing is going to be failures. Now, failures, I know a lot of people are saying, why would we want to look at that? But that is the reality as a pilot we have to be prepared for. And XPlane gives us a really great ability to customize this and randomize this. So on our screen, we have the aircraft selection page. We can click on the failures button, which is on the bottom tab. And that will take us into a page where we can look at the different categories of failures we're going to work with. We also have the ability, and I see that my screen's moving a little slow, so I'll take my time here.
Yeah, I was going to mention, Chris, it seems like it's some of these, I don't know if it's like a WebEx or something, but some of these, specifically the screenshots from the sims are the ones that are coming in a little delayed.
Okay, I see. All right, I'm going to go off of what is being presented rather than what's on my screen. So here we go. On this page right here, we are able to look at the individual chapters underneath what categories. So right now we've looked into the instruments chapter. we can choose some of these subcategories for what we want to edit or maybe make some changes to. Here we've selected our engine instruments, RPMs, and what we can do with the screen, and I apologize everyone, it's not loading as well as we'd like. I can get into, I want RPM indicator to fail at a certain altitude, at a certain airspeed, when I click a certain button. So it really gives us that ability to, today I'm gonna practice this type of emergency. I'm gonna set it so that this many minutes into the flight, there's a chance of it happening. I could say when I get to this certain altitude, it's going to happen. When I hit this key, it's gonna happen. So it really does give us a way to stay on our toes and practice said emergencies. Final thing about emergencies, and I'm gonna glaze through it quickly because I think this one slide is what's causing the problem because there's a lot of images populating. We can set a randomizer for what maintenance failures we would like. So I could say, I want this batch of failures, something engine focused, and I'd like one of these to occur every 7 hours of flying. And therefore, when you jump into the aircraft and as you're flying over time, whether it's an hour here, an hour there, they will randomly happen to your aircraft. So you can get close to real life where, you know, you're expecting your pitot heat to act up this many hours into the flight, or maybe your engine instruments have a certain lifetime of when they start getting needed to be checked. You can populate that into the program as a nice way to work with the randomization that XPlane brings to the table. Okay, next slide. This looks like this one is synced up. The third and final thing I really like about XPlane 12's in-flight system is we have the ability to recall how a flight has gone. We can re-watch how we have flown. So let's say I've flown into an airport. I didn't have a landing that I necessarily liked, and I want to go ahead and critique it. I'd like to re-watch it. Unless you have a screen recorder running, typically you can't just rewind it and go see what's happening. Well, in XPlane 12, they have a default option called toggle replay mode. And this is a select down item from the top left bar. It's under our flight tab. And you'll see the toggle replay mode. When you click on that, we're gonna have a little slider bar that will go to the top of our screen. And with this slider bar, we can now change how far into the flight we want to start reviewing it. We can actually have it go at regular speed. We can rewind at regular speed, all the above. And the reason I like that is because I can then rewatch that landing that I was unhappy with from outside the aircraft and see how my flare was, or see when did I set my flaps, or when did I start my turn from base to final to make it more in line. I can even go so far as to put myself in the right seat of the aircraft, as we see on the screen, and I could act as an instructor. I could see when the yoke is being pulled back, how the rudder pedals are moving, if throttle was added at the right time, maybe to smooth out a bumpy landing. So this toggle replay mode is something I use quite a bit. I like it because it really gives you the way to analyze any flight from any angle that you would like, and it offers a lot more benefits than I initially thought were going to be there. Another great thing about XPlane 12 is it is Mac compatible. So if you have a MacBook Pro or you've got a Macintosh desktop, you have the ability to put XPlane 12 on your Macintosh operating system and it'll work with those devices. Microsoft Flight Simulator will not work with Macintosh devices, worth mentioning. Another thing is you get to fly before you buy. So you can download the free demo of XPlane 12, go fly with a few provided aircraft in a small portion of the United States, but you really get a feel for the user interface, how it operates, what works for you, what doesn't, and I think is a great feature about it. Next up, we have Infinite Flight. So this is a program where you're able to tell the aircraft to make a pitch or a roll based off of your mobile handheld device. So it works on phones. It also works on tablets, very common in aviation flight bags, but it uses the accelerometers in those devices. So let's say I have my iPad, I'm running infinite flight, I'm flying at 172, and I pitch my iPad forward. It's going to be the equivalent of me pushing forward on the yoke, and we'll watch our aircraft start to descend. Kind of a cool feature, I think, and is great for doing something while at my desk or in between flights. It works really well. Another thing I like about Infinite Flight is they've expanded a lot of their out of the gate abilities. So they offer free flight, which is how the program started. They also provide flight training and then also missions as ways to give you direction on how you should use the program for the day, and also pique your interest of how you can really take advantage of it. I will say that Infinite Flight and Sporties have been working on a couple projects of how we can incorporate what we both excel in for some maybe flight training or maybe missions. I can't say much more than that. We are going to announce the full project at the end of June at Flight Sim Expo. So if you plan on watching those presentations, or you want to come back around the end of June for some blogs we're going to have on the subject, we'd be proud and excited to announce it. But for now, all I can say is we've got some irons in the fire, if you will. Last but not least, when it comes to Infinite Flight, is the ability to quickly sync a phone or a tablet with our EFB. So if you are using ForeFlight or you're using Garmin Pilot, you can quickly and easily connect Infinite Flight, which as you'll see is running on my phone, to the EFB, and then have them speak to each other. I like this whenever ForeFlight rolls out a new feature, I can quickly go test it out at my desk. I don't need to go fire up a computer that's typically off, or I don't need to jump in an aircraft and go test out those features. I can do it in a matter of 5 minutes or less, and is also a really great way to practice using ForeFlight or Garmin Pilot prior to getting in an aircraft. Okay, so we have covered quite a bit about software. Let's jump into the hardware setups. And I like to think of hardware as the nervous system, if we're going to keep with the analogies. Hardware is where we're able to give those inputs to the PC, to the software, what we want, and then the outputs are provided on our screen. So hardware, nervous system. First up, we've got yokes. The SATEC, also known as Logitech Flight Sim Yoke, is a great starter piece. It's a majority plastic, so it's not as durable. It doesn't feel as robust, but it's great because it's got push and pull, it's got left and right, also has an LCD timer on the front, but it comes with those 3 levers you'll see on the right side of the image, which are throttle, prop, and mixture. Again, a great piece for someone getting started on flight sim. If you are a little price conscious, this will work well for you. On the right is our most popular yoke. This is the Honeycomb Alpha Flight Simulator yoke. It has a metal shaft that rides on ball bearings, so it's a very smooth feel when you push forward, pull back, roll left and right. And a lot of our customers just really like its profile and the sense of realism you get as you're flying that approach or flaring the aircraft. I will say it's the one I use the most here at Sporties, and if you're doing your research, it's worth noting the Honeycomb Alpha. When it comes to throttles, we have the pre-mentioned Logitech standalone throttle. As you can see, it has 3 quick levers and then 3 two-way switches. So you could indicate flaps moving up, flaps moving down, trim moving up, trim moving down. You can pre-program these to whatever you desire, and then your levers will run your throttle, your prop, or your mixture. Along with the Honeycomb Alpha yoke, there's a Honeycomb Bravo throttle quadrant. And this is quite the component or flight sim hardware piece. And I'm going to jump into a couple reasons I really like to highlight it. As you can see, the Bravo has a lot that it can do. As it populates the Honeycomb Bravo, let's start on the left side and counterclockwise talk about some of its features. So it has a 2-position gear lever with LCD lights. So gear in transition, gear extended, you'll get those lights. It also has a trim wheel. Moving along, you'll see there are 6 different levers for engine management on the Honeycomb Bravo. Moving along, we have a tension knob on the right side of the throttle. Towards the right side top, we have a flap lever. So we have an easy way to indicate flaps, and the shape and feel of it is very similar to what we'd have in a 172. And then on top, we have autopilot controls. So there are 7 different activation buttons, a 5-position knob for selection, and then also a increase or decrease knob. I really like that feature because it allows us to test out or get better acquainted with a autopilot in our aircraft, and is one of those overlooked things that I think is very, very valuable when using a simulator. Now, you notice how there are 6 levers configured right now for, say, a multi-engine general aviation aircraft, but you can reconfigure or move those levers around to whatever aircraft you're going to be flying. So let's say we have 1 throttle and 1 mixture. I would use that to populate for, say, a Cessna 172. If I had 1 throttle, 1 prop, and 1 mixture, I would have that as my equivalent of, say, a 182. We can go back to the GA multi-engine, 2 throttle, 2 prop, 2 mixture, which is the most common setting I have it in at Sporty's. But we also have the ability to jump into commercial airliners. So it will come with a 2-engine setup for an airliner. You can see a speed brake lever on the left, our 2 engine management levers, and then a flap lever. And of course, we can throw 2 more throttles in there if need be to really jump into some of those wide body aircraft and enjoy using it in that situation. That all comes in the box, so we can go all the way from a Cessna 172 or a Piper Cub all the way up to the larger aircraft. And it's a great reason why the Honeycomb Bravo is one of customers' favorites here at Sporty's. Let's talk about pedals. So if you're going to have a yoke, you're going to have engine management, you're going to need some pedals. Partially for taxing, but also so that you're able to use the toe braking and recreate some of those scenarios where you really need to get on those brakes. Great starter set is the Thrustmaster Flight rudder pedals. They have counter swaying pedals, so you push on the right, the left will come back, and they also have individual toe brakes. Great starter piece. The Logitech rudder pedals build on that with a tension knob, so you can change the tension of push needed, and then also a heel rest edit. So we can change how far or how high this edit rest is with this button right here. Make sure it's comfortable for you. Jumping into the accessories. The first one I really like to highlight is the EFB mount. This is very similar to a product we sell. It allows you to connect your electronic flight flag to your yoke on your aircraft. But instead of having a yoke connector, we use a C-clamp. So you can apply that to your desk. The arm will connect to the C-clamp, and then the other side of the arm will connect to the back of this tablet holder. And when you get all of those together connected, they will create a little holder that can sit on the side of your desk and will work for showing your electronic flight bag next to your flight sim hardware. So here, as you can see, I'm using a flight stick. EFB is on the left side of the table, not obstructing my view. Again, a nice way to simulated fly as you actually fly. And then on the right, we have the ProFlight multi-panel. This is another autopilot controls hardware piece we have at our disposal. We can put this on our desk, plug it into the simulator, and it will automatically work with our aircraft for all those autopilot controls. It also has pitch trim, auto throttle, and a flaps setting on that piece. We can also get a headset that will work specifically with a flight simulator. If you jump into using a simulator for communication practice, very great flight sim headset right there. And then avionics. That was a challenge for me of basically learning a new computer's logic while I was trying to keep an aircraft flying. We now have the ability to learn that on the ground. The real SimGear avionics packages, and we currently have in the 430 and 530 on our screen, allow you to plug into the computer and get accurate representation of what happens when you push those keys. They have turn knobs, they have soft keys. They're a really great piece to help you better understand how those operate in your aircraft. All right, let's get to the big question I constantly get. Can I log approaches at home? Long story short, the answer is yes. Long story. During the summer of 2018, the FAA announced significant changes that aim to make it easier for pilots to keep their instrument currency using an aviation training device, or ATD for short. You can also use these for logging hours in your logbook. It doesn't have to be instrument focused. In order to do that, you will need a Redbird TD or TD2, which incorporates the pedals as you see on our screen. It will qualify as an aviation training device. Federal Aviation Regulation 61.51 Part G reads, a person may use time in a full flight simulator, flight training device, or aviation training device for satisfying instrument recency experience requirements, provided a logbook or training record is maintained to specify the training device, time, and the content, end quote. So the answer is yes, you can use an ATD or BATD as they are called to log time from the convenience of your home. To give example though, a BATD costs about $8,000. And in my mind, I could use that $8,000 to go fly an aircraft quite a bit. So if there are things keeping you out of the aircraft, the BATD is a great option, but not necessarily one I highly recommend. I really like to look at these at-home flight simulators as a way to save time in training rather than logging time. My 2 cents. All right, next up, we've got what David and I have talked about a few times is the 10-foot rule. And what I mean by this is whenever you are within 10 feet of the ground, a flight simulator's efficacy, if you will, really drops. And what I mean by that is when you are coming in to flare, when you're coming in to land, it gets a little off accurate, if I may say. When I am taxiing the aircraft, it never feels correct. I've got to throw in way too many RPMs to make a turn than I expect. When I first lift off the ground at rotation speed, sometimes that loss of drag seems a little bit off. So where I'm going with this is, yes, you can still practice taking off an aircraft by going full throttle, releasing your brakes, making sure your gauges are green, running through those flows. But do not think that if you've done 30 takeoffs in a flight simulator, you're going to know exactly what it feels like in a real aircraft. Exact same thing for landings. Please do not think you can do 100 landings in one of these programs. You'll know exactly what it feels like in a 172. It's not the exact same. Whereas en route, things of that sort, they seem to bring a little bit more accuracy. So just when we're talking about this stuff, keep in mind that 10-foot rule, if you will. First thing I like to recommend as a best use for using a simulator, and is partially because I was close to this, is checklist memory. So I was one of those students where I took that poster, I put it on the back of my bedroom door, and I would run through scenarios of, okay, engine fire, where do I go? What do my hands do? What am I looking at? And that was great for training, but I wouldn't be able to get feedback on the changes I was mentally going through, what kind of indications I'd get from the aircraft. With a simulator, we do get that feedback. We are able to get a response to when I pull mixture, what's going to happen to the other gauges? How quickly is my airspeed going to start to drop? You can bring those physical checklists to your desk at home and run through how you're going to use them in line with the flight simulator. So I really like to recommend using checklists with a flight simulator, and it's a nice way to get that feedback. Next up, we have density altitude understanding. So go to your home airport on a hot day, take off and see how long of a ground roll you need, and then take it up to Telluride and see how much runway is needed. Now, a Cessna 172, I'm pretty sure is not going to be able to operate in Telluride, or shouldn't, but we have the ability to go test these and quickly work on the extremes of here's how my aircraft performs on a low density altitude day, how it performs on a high density altitude day, and we can get better understanding of what that is. Constant rate climbs, descents, and turns. It sounds elementary, but it is helpful to work on. Let's say I want a constant 500 foot per minute descent or ascent, I can practice that in the simulator. I want to keep my airspeed at this amount. So you think of VY. We can go practice those in a simulator, and it's an easy way to better understand when you change plus or minus 5, 10 knots, what happens to the rest of the instruments. I also like using a simulator to practice turns or standard rate turns. We can jump into the aircraft and work on, if I'm trying to hold a 3 degree, or I'm sorry, a bank that's going to give me 3 degrees of change of heading, what's it going to be? And in a Cessna 172 at 100 knots, you'll see it's about a 15-degree bank angle. And then I can jump in a larger aircraft, triple our speed to 300 knots, and it's going to be a 39.5-degree bank angle to hit that standard rate. That's one of those things that it was tough for me to understand on paper, but once I jumped in the aircraft or the digital aircraft, I could go test it out. It was really helpful. Here we have best rate of climb versus best angle of climb. So what I did for this test, I'm making sure my slides are keeping up with me, is I went and I connected ForeFlight to my Cessna 172, and then I went and I flew straight out from Sporty's, first at VX, so holding about 60, 62 knots on the left side. As you can see by the green line, we're right around 60 knots, and our altitude went from 1,000 feet up to 4,000 feet on the left pane. Here we also have the view of our travel. And then on the right side, I wanted to do best rate of climb. So same altitude gain from 1,000 feet up to 4,000 feet. And then airspeed, I was aiming for about 75 to 80 knots. Now the scale of this versus that is off, so the green line looks lower here, but it is confirmed I was holding VY. We can jump into a simulator and get accurate representation of how did I do. With VX, it took me 3 minutes and 49 seconds to get up to 4,000 feet. And then at VY, it took 3 minutes and 13 seconds. Now, again, this is, not a large distance. It's 36-second difference. And we're only going from 1,000 feet to 4,000 feet. But let's scale it out to maybe we were climbing to 9,000 feet. Or maybe we were in an aircraft much larger than a Cessna 172. These are ways we can quickly jump in a simulator, test out something we read about in a book, and get a better understanding why best rate of climb gets you further away from the aircraft and gets you to your cruising altitude quicker than best angle of time. Some other things I like simulator to test out or better understand is VOR tracking. The ability that I can jump into an aircraft and understand how that VOR operates regardless of my heading. That was one of those mind-blowing moments for me to understand as I'm moving towards the needle, how it swings in. Really, my heading is independent of that. That was helpful to understand. Regrettably, I had to pay to go up in an aircraft and learn that. With simulators today, you can learn that while on the ground. We can also better understand our instruments / avionics. The logic of these panels is 95% or better compared to what actually happens in a G1000 suite. Garmin 430, 530, GTN models. We can really find out what's going to happen when we turn the dial to go to page 3 of said chapter or hit direct 2 and turn the wheel. We can all do that in a simulator and better understand the navigation and the use of our avionics. As I mentioned earlier, EFB understanding. Highly recommend if you fly with an EFB, connect it to your flight simulator and better understand how you can use them in tandem and also test out new features. But also, it brings you closer to using the simulator as you use a real aircraft. When you fly with an EFB, you're looking for this. You're using direct 2 or you're watching for traffic. You can do that also in a simulator as a nice way to make sure the simulator is a tool rather than a toy. It also brings a lot of value when you jump into the instrument training realm and you're starting to fly into areas with bad weather or obscured visibility. That's where it really starts to pay some dividends. I also like mentioning CrossCountry Flying. So I can plan out a flight in Microsoft Flight Simulator, take advantage of the fact that outside the aircraft is so vivid and parallel to what happens outside the aircraft. If I'm flying to a new airport next week, on Tuesday or Wednesday leading up to it, I'm going to fly it digitally. I'm going to get a better understanding of what the outside the aircraft looks like. Maybe I'm going to get a better idea of the town I'll be flying over, a better idea of when I'm going to cross a railroad or when I'm going to cross a lake. And I really like using Microsoft for this because of how great outside the aircraft looks and how it looks on my EFB. It's going to better prepare me for flying into unknown areas rather than just going there myself. Okay, so we have made it through those slides. I'm gonna wrap it up with some additional resources. I hope I piqued interest for maybe a couple listeners today of the value a flight simulator brings, what you can do with it, why it's something to consider. But I understand we've only got 30, 40 minutes today, so I want to give you a couple resources of here's a direction to go in, or here's where you can learn more if you really want to get involved in building these simulators. First up, I like to recommend Flight Sim Association. It's a great group of simmers who are cataloging blogs, videos, announcements in the industry. That is the group that also puts on the Flight Sim Expo. The big event this year is at the end of June. That's when Sporty's and Infinite Flight, we're going to announce our partnership and the project we're working on together. It's held out in Vegas this year. It changes venue every year, but it's one to consider. And they also stream a lot of their announcements and presentations. So one worth considering if you feel Flight Sim is right for you. And then our friends at FS Elite. This is a group across the pond. They're located in UK, and they are actively reviewing, I'd say, almost every flight sim product that comes to market, whether it's hardware, whether it's software. As you can see, they have a review on the Piston Duke for Microsoft Flight Sim. They also have other aircraft there. They can also filter whether they're articles you want to see from Microsoft, whether you want to see them for XPlane, whether you want to see them for a different program. So really a huge catalog of information from FS Elite, and I like to give them a shout out when I can. Call me old school. Another thing I really like is literature. I like to have a book at my desk or at my flight sim rig as I'm going through it and maybe checking off phases of doing something or highlighting a section. These are two books that I have at my desk here at Sporty's, and I like to reference them from time to time. They're a little old, but the scenarios or the tips or advice they give you is evergreen. You're able to use what they're providing or scenario you may want to enact for a challenging takeoff or landing. Those will work on any simulator anytime. So if you're like me and you like having a page to scroll through or turn to the next one as you're progressing, things worth considering there. And then lastly, I like to cover with, the quintessential question, is a flight simulator valuable? 20, 30 years ago, I don't know how I'd answer that, but today I can gladly say, I think a flight sim is very valuable. A flight simulator, when used correctly, is absolutely a great way to train or better understand what an aircraft does. Here we have a picture of Evan. He's one of the co-founders of Flight Sim Association, that first group I talked about that puts on Flight Sim Expo. And what I like about Evan's story is on his very first flight with his instructor, he was running the radios in his aircraft. That would have never been an option for me. The intimidation factor was a part of my training, but for Evan to be his first time physically going flying and feel confident enough to turn a radio dial, to push the talk button and make those radio calls, he was able to do that because he's an avid flight sim user. So he really understood the process and the environment, took advantage of it, and then leveraged that into what he did as a career. And Evan is now flying for an airliner, sitting in the right seat, making money from what his hobby used to be as a flight sim user. So whenever used correctly, whenever there's a mission or a real want to use a simulator for more than just buzzing the tower, I highly recommend it. And there are a lot of stories I hear, new ones every week, on someone who started in flight sim becoming a professional pilot. So that wraps up a lot of today's presentation. If we mention some hardware, products, or anything you may be interested in, we have a flight sim category on the bottom right of our homepage, sporties.com. We also have some blogs online, and we also have customer service who's able to answer any questions you have about hardware. I apologize ahead of time about the slides lagging here, but I'm more than happy to take some questions or give some directions for whoever would like it. David?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Chris, and thanks to everyone for hanging in with us. We've got plenty of questions. I'll try to keep the themes all together here. So I know this one can be difficult for you to answer, Chris, but a lot of questions about comparing XPlane 12 and Microsoft 2020. Pros and cons to each. Which one do you prefer, or better uses for either sim or anything like that?
Sure. And, I will make sure on our next webinar we do a little bit more of a comparison. I think both have their strengths. Well, let's start with some of the strengths of Microsoft. It is very easy to use. It is a vivid profile of what happens in an aircraft and outside an aircraft. The community has never been more vibrant, so I like how there's a lot of interaction, and they always roll out updates to continuously challenge you. For instance, when Maverick came out, they brought in the ability to go fly the FA-18. They created some scenarios. Now, again, I'm taking a step away from realism here, but what I'm trying to get at is they are constantly trying to add new things to the program to keep people engaged, and I really admire that. It has great planning. It has a lot of visual aids, which for me, a visual learner, was super impactful. The community, you are able to quickly turn on a couple settings and it will populate all real life aircraft in the digital world. You can turn another setting and it will turn on live weather. So let's say you had a flight that was scrubbed because ceilings were a little too low. You can jump in a digital aircraft and test out what would it have been like if I had taken off? Could I have stayed in the traffic pattern while keeping the aircraft in sight? So Microsoft is a great program. I like to recommend it for people getting interested in aviation or flight sim because it is very appealing and is a great starter, if you will. XPlane, it's a little bit more detail oriented, so it's not going to be as shiny, as pretty, if you want to call it that, but it is going to allow you to really make some edits and jump into a scenario that you would like. The toggle replay mode, I can't stress enough. I use that a lot myself. The ability to really curate where you're going to fly. But another thing I like about XPlane is a lot of their previous programs are upward or downward compatible with aircraft. So let's say I bought a certain aircraft, a Mooney, in XPlane 11. I can take that same little widget and bring it into XPlane 12, and it's going to work. So typically, if someone comes up to me and says, I have aircraft ABC with this avionics panel, this autopilot, and I'd like to fly that in a simulator, you're more likely to find that layout in XPlane's catalog of aircraft just because it's been around longer than Microsoft's, which previous iterations of the program are no longer compatible with the newer 2020. So each has its benefits, but they're both great programs.
Wonderful. A couple of questions on using Microsoft on an Xbox versus a computer. First off, just some general questions about any real differences. Does the Xbox support Flight Sim Builder G1000 or Honeycomb? Those are kind of the primary themes.
Sure. So when using an Xbox, there is a chip that hardware pieces need to communicate with said Xbox. And because it's a recent development, if you will, in the flight sim community, there aren't many hardware pieces that have that Xbox chip. To my understanding, a couple brands that do have the Xbox compatibility are Turtle Beach. They offer a couple hardware pieces that will seamlessly plug into an Xbox and work a-okay. Honeycomb does have a Yolk that is Xbox compatible. It's about $75 to $100 more expensive than the base Honeycomb Alpha, The other one is called the Honeycomb Alpha XPC. That will work with a Xbox and allow you to give push, pull, and roll indications. And then Thrustmaster offers a couple sticks, flight sticks that are Xbox compatible. But other than that, there aren't many options. Whereas with a PC, any hardware piece out there is going to work perfectly. The PC option is a wider net, whereas Xbox has to have that extra icing on the cake, if you will, to work with the Xbox. So that's why PC is a little bit more favored. There's also a lot of add-ons. The EFB connection I mentioned, that will only work on a PC, that won't work on an Xbox. If you get into communication training, which you can actually speak to real live other people who are telling you digital Cessna 172, turn left heading 030. You can do that with a PC and those programs. You can't do that with Xbox. So Xbox is a great way to get into it if you already have the tower and you already have the controllers and it's a low barrier to entry to run Microsoft Flight Sim. But if you have the means, I recommend a PC.
Sounds great. All right, a lot of really good questions coming through. Here's one that I think is probably a burning question for some folks is VR. What's
There we go. It was
what's your
coming.
opinion on VR? Any comment on the specific use of Meta VR for better immersion? I know you and I have talked about this, Chris, but obviously lots of interest out there as well.
Absolutely. I think VR is going to be an amazing thing for flight sim community, and let's call ourselves the middle class of flight sim. We build rigs to use at home. We don't have a 5-figure budget, or we're not for training the military. When using a flight sim at home, I think VR is not there yet. I'm sure the Air Force is using VR headsets. I'm sure a lot of larger companies are. For someone building at home, it's challenging. The reason I say that is we have tested out the Quest. We also have an Apple Vision Pro here at Sporty's. We've tested that out. The getting it working with your PC is quite challenging. Think of it as two gears you're trying to make sure they match up. And if they're off by a little bit, you have to make edits between the headwear, between your processor and your graphics card on your PC. They really work well when they are configured to, the teeth are connecting on those gears, if you will, and that takes a lot of time. That being said, if you are able to make them work well, there's no better way to look over your shoulder and figure out when it's time to turn base. I absolutely agree with that. But I think the price point and the ability to get it to work consistently and to keep up with the updates is not as high on the need scale as I'd like to say. Another thing worth mentioning with VR is it will cause you to feel queasy. The first time I flew a simulator, I jumped in with a headset. I jumped in a aerobatics aircraft and I was flying up the Burj Khalifa tower. And after about 10 to 15 minutes, I felt sick. And from other people I've talked to, it's similar to aerobatics. You have to work your stomach up to it because your eyes and ears are getting one sense audibly, but yet the movement in your body and also your feet on the ground is another thing, and it really confuses your senses. So I like to say try it out. Absolutely, if you get the opportunity, give it a whirl, but I wouldn't budget $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 to bring that onto my simulator. I don't think the value is there yet, but when we get to a point where 50% of the population owns VR goggles or sunglasses, it's another conversation.
Awesome. A couple of questions coming in for folks regarding PC specs. Elijah says, interested in Microsoft, trying to get an idea for PC specs. And then Benjamin sounds like he's going to be setting up a unit in his college dorm, wondering where he can get a list of, systems that he needs, and a few other folks asking about lists of maybe vendors and price ranges for the computers needed to run these simulators.
Sure. And not to avoid ownership, but one thing I'd recommend for anyone who's in that boat, go on to your browser and type in Microsoft Flight Sim computer specifications. and it's going to give you a required, it's going to give you a recommended, and then it's going to give you the pristine. And I like to aim for the middle ground, the recommended, if you will. To throw out some quick numbers, you need a middle ground graphics card. You don't need an NVIDIA 4090 or anything of that sort, but you need something to keep up. You're going to need about 250 gigabytes of storage. You're going to need a decent processor. A lot of people ask about monitors. I get by with a great 40-inch decent monitor. Some people like curves. Some people like to go for the large ones. Really, a 36 to 42 inch is fine. But to answer the question, what do I need to budget for? With Moore's law and computing power just going, hockey stick up, you can get a gaming laptop, as they're called. A lot of big box stores sell those. That'll work for the person who inquired about their dorm. You can get one of those, I'd say in the $800 to $1,200 range. For building a PC, you can actually, if you have a tower and a monitor, you can get a little bit below that. If you are trying to create a PC that will handle Microsoft Flight Sim or XPlane, you can build one for about $700 or $800. The key term here is type in gaming PC or gaming laptop, and the big boxes, Best Buy, Newegg, they all batch those together of, I need to make sure it's got the ability to run some of these power hungry programs. And then you can just filter via price. So it's not like it used to be a decade ago where you need $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 just to have a computer. You can have or create one of these for under $1,000 today.
Great, thanks, Chris. Megan asks, what's the main differences between XPlane 11 and 12?
A lot of the differences between those two iterations is their weather engine was really worked on. So I know they wanted to focus on clouds, reflection, lighting, humidity. I think icing was also a thing they focused on. So a lot of stuff that falls into the meteorology realm. That's the big one for me. There's also a new batch of aircraft. So the aircraft listed in 11 versus 12. There's a little bit of overlap, but not very much. And that, I believe, is the main updates. Now, one thing I'd recommend if you are interested in what's really changed, XPlane or Laminar Research, the group behind XPlane, they have a very great blog article page on their site. And I actually laugh at my desk reading these sometimes because some of their editors are so eccentric, but yet get the point across. I love it. They have a great one on the aerodynamics of the F4 in afterburner mode and how difficult it is to make I think the Mach loop. Again, I'm getting granular here, but they really, for lack of a better term, geek out on making sure this program is accurate. And I really admire that. So what I'd recommend for anyone who's interested in those programs is read up on their blog, and you'll start to see they didn't just create digital aircraft to represent flight. They kind of created their own world in a computer and make sure that the aerodynamics are similar to what happens in aircraft. So I give them a gold star on that.
Wonderful. So Dean asks, any big differences between using a TV and a gaming monitor?
Easy answer, not really. If you have the ability to hook up a television or a gaming monitor, and it works well with your graphics card if you're going that route, or it's able to emulate in real time, it's not lagging or anything. You don't want choppiness as you're coming into land at 15 knots above stall speed. If it works, I give it a full check off. I think it's a great option.
Perfect. All right. Let's see, a couple of questions on controls. Anything in the way of forced feedback yokes coming down the pipeline, and then most realistic rudder pedals out there?
Sure. So force feedback yokes, I highly recommend if you have the financial means. To my understanding, force feedback yokes are going to start right around the $700 to $800 price point. But what a force feedback yoke does is it will move the natural resting point of the yoke when you change your settings. So to me, it's extremely similar to what happens in an aircraft. When I trim the aircraft for my current settings or my pitch, the yoke sits back a little bit more. And that's what a force feedback yoke does also. As you're able to change your pitch trim, the natural resting point moves aft or more forward, and it's very similar to what happens in the real life aircraft. I like that. But then it'll also give you some little iterations of a push or a pull as you're flying the aircraft, simulating turbulence or simulating the sloppiness, if you will, when you get down to slow flight. That's very valuable. That's one new way to really bring the hardware you're using closer to what happens in real life, and I always endorse that. So if you have the ability to get a force feedback yoke, definitely recommend it. You're not going to regret it. When it comes to rudder pedals, it's really a matter of how much you want to spend. What we showed on our slide for rudder pedals were the basics, the Thrustmaster, and then the Logitech. If you want to go up a little bit more, there's the Thrustmaster TPRs, and these are similar to what you'd see in a Boeing aircraft. I personally like to use them the most because they feel really well and you can customize the tension on them, both the heel and then also push. They are expensive. They're about $580. And then top of the line is the Redbird rudder pedals, which I believe are $750-ish. Those look like they were pulled right out of a Cessna 172. The foot panels themselves, the way they slide on the bottom base, it's pretty darn close to the way your pedals operate in a 172. So, we've got a basics, we've got a great, and then we've got a best. Those are the way I'd rate those.
Perfect. A couple of questions on different some programs out there, specifically Microsoft 2006, GeoFS, and Prepared 3D. Any opinions on any of those three platforms?
Yeah, I love Microsoft Flight Sim 06. I will say, it's no longer supported. So if you have trouble, if there's issues, you're not going to be able to reach out to someone. The community also, there's a limited amount of people still running it, so you can't bump questions off fellow digital pilots, if you will. Communities now using 2020. To that point, there's another program coming down the pipeline from Microsoft. It's Microsoft Flight Sim 2024. They have been very tight-lipped about when it's going to come out. There is a single trailer online. It's on YouTube. It's on their YouTube page. You can find it. But it's going to focus a lot more on what a aircraft can do as a career. Think of freight flying, or think of traveling to remote areas, helicopter pilot going out to oil rigs, things of that sort. So when that comes out, 06 will be even another iteration away, and I worry that you're just going to have trouble using it much. That being said, if you've got it on your PC, it still boots up and runs. It's a great program. So highly recommended if you've got it. GeoFS, I have limited experience with, so I will have to defer that to the Reddit threads, if you will. Prepared, I recognize as a really great program. When I talk to simmers, usually the people who are right seat or left seat flying for the airlines, they like Prepared because it is extremely detail oriented. It's gotten far away from where it's a nice layout and it looks cool. It's more of, I can change these small third decimal points and how the flight's going to go, and that's what I want. Quick background: Prepared is it is owned by Lockheed Martin, and it was a purchase of the early Microsoft Flight Sim. I believe it's 06 or X, Microsoft X. So it is purchased that program, rebranded it, made some tweaks, and now they are the ones who support it. That being said, it is a very great program. It has a lot of professional use. They offer some ownership cycles that are in the $1,500 range. You got to have a pretty darn good program to have a $1,500 price tag, and they back it up. So I like Prepared. I don't fly with it as much as I probably should, but if you think it's a good program for what you're doing or flying, you can't go wrong.
Awesome. So plenty of questions still rolling through. Let's see. Try to hit some of the ones that are
And I will say, David, feel free, after we conclude today, you can send me those just with a person's email address and their question, and I will respond as I'm able to.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Here's one. A couple of folks, Isabel specifically, and then looks like Timothy also mentioned Cessna 172. Do you have a preference over which sim provides the most realistic experience in a 172, specifically XPlane or Microsoft?
I would say XPlane 12 provides a better representation. My test here is when both programs first came out, I like to do what I call the steep turn test. I would go fly out to our practice area here at Sporty's, which is greatly depicted in both programs. I'd take a 172 up to 3,500 feet, and then I would enter a 60-degree steep turn and hold altitude. And that was a maneuver I had to practice quite a bit to get my commercial certificate. So I know how the aircraft should operate, what it should look like, and how much RPMs you should throw in for that roll in and roll out. XPlane had better performance. Now, Microsoft has been continuously updating their program. They're getting better with aerodynamics. So as I'm saying it, I realize I should go do that test again today. But out of the gate, XPlane 12, Cessna 172 performance in that scenario was a little bit better. So if you are gonna fly by the numbers, you're gonna load that digital aircraft to what your actual aircraft is. You're gonna take off from your home airport. You're gonna take off in typical weather conditions. You're gonna go full power and peg, best rate of climb. You're gonna get a more similar situation in XPlane 12 than a Microsoft Flight Sim in my fields.
Got it. All right, couple people mentioning the Condor glider simulators. Do you have any um, experience with those or any insight on those to share?
I do not have experience with the Condor glider simulators. What I will say is Microsoft Flight Sim for their 40th anniversary. So that was, I guess, 2 years ago. Oh, where's the time go? They brought in glider flying to the program. So you are able to jump into a glider and fly around. They also have the settings so that it will visually indicate thermals, which was helpful for me of seeing where do I need to go and start those turns to gain altitude, and then I can depart the thermals and go practice. They also have the training ability in Microsoft Flight Sim. So for laymen like myself, I'm able to go ahead and learn the basics of glider flying and then go explore the world with it. These programs are detailed enough to where if you say it's a cloudless day, you turn the heat up, you make sure the sun is shining, there's going to be thermals accurate in the program to what happens in the real world. So if glider flying is your forte, I'd recommend Microsoft Flight Sim as an option for you too.
Great. So Deanna asks, my throttle isn't working enough to get off the ground in Microsoft 2020. What's the best way to get it mapped? Where do I go for help?
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. Yes, it could. You know what? It should be a mapping issue. So I would recommend watching a couple YouTube videos on how to change the settings. It could be your sensor is only providing 20% of your input. So when you go full throttle, it's only telling the aircraft to do 20% of that. That's maybe a 2 or 3 minute fix. You could also have something completely offset. You could also have a broken hardware piece. So what I'd like to recommend is start with YouTube. We have a couple videos on how to configure the Honeycomb Bravo to Microsoft Flight Sim for single engine. But what we cover in that are the basics. You don't have to have a Honeycomb Bravo. It'll walk you through finding the axes, connecting it to throttle, and then making sure your hardware piece indicates throttle in the system. It'll work with any hardware piece. So I'd start with that. If that doesn't fix the problem, I think you may have a faulty mechanical piece, at which point you might want to reach out to whoever sold you that hardware piece.
All right. So we got about a minute left, so I'll try to get one or two more quick questions in. So a few folks have asked, any software that has any good tower communication integration? I know there's a couple of like VATSIM programs and stuff like that out there. But any recommendations on that front, Chris?
Absolutely. The two I like to recommend are VATSIM, VATSIM, or Pilot Edge. They're both great programs. They have benefits. I believe it's VATSIM is a subscription and Pilot Edge is free. And I apologize if I missed those two up, but either way, one is free, it's great. But both of them, what they bring to the table is you are able to communicate over your headset or through your speakers with real life people who are going to say, Cessna, I see on my screen, similar to ATC, turn left heading for traffic, or you can begin your descent, or you can get your clearance from them. So if you're looking for communication use, which I highly recommend, that would have been great for me to have during my training, Pilot Edge or VATSIM, both great programs.
Perfect. And we'll get in one more question because this one's come up a few times. Oh, where did it go on my screen here? Let's see. Okay, there we go. Infinity Flight, is that free or what's the cost of that?
Sure. So they have both models. They have a free entry version where you're able to download it on a mobile phone or a tablet. I believe you get 50 to 60% of their aircraft, so they really don't hold back on airplanes you can fly with the free version. Now, the free version will give you a limited amount of space. I think it's the southwestern portion of the United States you get with the free version, but it allows you to, fly 172, learn the basics of what it's like having a touch screen for controls. For instance, throttle is a lever you move from left to right to simulate 0 to 100%. Yaw is the same thing. When I move the slider to the right, I'm pushing with my right pedal, move it to the left, pushing with my left. The free version is great. The step up from that, the pro version as they call it, I believe it's 50, 60, maybe $70 a year. So, it's going to be much less than Netflix, but it's also going to open up a lot of different aircraft flying throughout the entire world, not just country world. And they also give you all those training scenarios, all those missions that are growing every day. So I would recommend if you're interested in it, because there's a little bit of a learning curve on how to use a device as hardware, try the free one first, and then hopefully if you like it, you can sign up for the pro version.
Sounds great, Chris. So we are at our time limit. So we did have a number of questions that were unanswered. So I apologize to everyone if we didn't get to your questions. Lots of really good questions today, though. So before I turn it over to Chris to wrap up, I just want to remind everyone we've got two more presentations today. This evening at 5 o'clock Central Time, we'll be talking about strategies for successfully passing the check ride. And then at 7 p.m. is becoming a career aviator, which path is best. So be sure to check those out. And we've got 4 more days of webinars ahead for us. But Chris, I'll let you have the final word and wrap us up for the afternoon.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, David. Thank you, EAA. We're happy to be a part of this. As you mentioned, I know there's a lot of questions. If you want to send questions to Sporty's customer support, we have a chat, we have email. If they're not able to take care of your questions, they'll route them to me. I'd love to help anyone out who didn't get a question answered. But again, thank you for attending. Thanks again, David. We're happy to do this, and we look forward to the next one.
Thanks, Chris. Everybody have a great day, and we'll see you at a webinar coming up soon.